Throughout mythology, gods of death and the underworld have ruled the shadowy realms of the afterlife, shaping the fate of the souls of the deceased. From well-known figures like Anubis and Hades to obscure gods barely remembered today, let's dive into the darkness of the underworld. Thanatos, in Greek mythology, is the personification of death, but his role is quite distinct from that of Hades, who rules the underworld. Thanatos represents peaceful and non-violent death, offering a more subdued end compared to other death gods in Greek mythology. He is the son of Nyx, the primordial goddess of night, and Erebus, the personification of darkness, making him part of a family tied to dark and inevitable forces. His twin brother is Hypnos, the god of sleep, and the two are often portrayed together, reinforcing the connection between sleep and death as gentle transitions. Despite being the personification of death, Thanatos doesn't feature prominently in many myths, partly because Hades overshadows him as the ruler of the dead. His appearances, when they do occur, highlight his calm, inevitable nature. For example, in the Iliad, Thanatos is sent by Zeus to retrieve the body of Sarpedon from the battlefield, showing that death, though tragic, is part of the natural order. In art, he's often depicted as a winged figure, sometimes as a bearded man, or alternatively, as a youthful figure, reflecting the timelessness of death. Interestingly, Thanatos could be outwitted or even physically bested. The most famous tale of this is his encounter with Sisyphus, the king of Corinth, who tricked Thanatos and bound him in chains to avoid death. This caused chaos, as no one could die until Ares, the god of war, intervened and freed Thanatos. Another myth involves Heracles, who physically confronts Thanatos to rescue Alcestis from the clutches of death, further showing that while death is inescapable, it can be momentarily delayed. Medjed is one of the more mysterious deities in ancient Egyptian mythology. His primary role was as a guardian of Osiris, the god of the afterlife, where he protected souls as they traversed the perilous journey through the underworld. Medjed's name translates to the smiter, and he was often depicted as a shrouded figure with only his eyes and feet visible. And if you're only listening to this video, I encourage you to quickly look now. Medjed looks like a Scooby-Doo villain, dressed up as a ghost, to lower the property value of an old mansion. Interestingly, unlike most Egyptian gods, who were shown in profile, Medjed was unique in being forward-facing. Notably, scholars differ on what Medjed is actually supposed to be, with some arguing that he's a human-like figure in a shroud, while others argue that he's an oil jar with legs. The most well-known reference to Medjed comes from the Book of the Dead, an ancient funerary text. Here, he is described as a deity who could strike unseen, emphasizing his role as an invisible force that punished enemies and kept Osiris safe. His most interesting power, though, is his ability to shoot beams from his eyes. Notably, Medjed has had a resurgence in popularity in recent years, after becoming a meme on Japanese social media for his comical appearance. Since then, he has gone on to make appearances in video games, manga, and anime. Nergal, a prominent god in Mesopotamian mythology, represents a complex blend of death, war, plague, and destruction. His origins can be traced back to the city of Cutha, where he was worshipped primarily as a deity of death and the underworld, ruling over the land of no return. Nergal's role expanded over time as he became associated with war and disease, earning him a fearsome reputation as both a destroyer and protector in this ancient pantheon. His mythological narrative is particularly intriguing. Nergal, often known by his earlier name Meslamtaya, originally seemed to be a god related to agriculture before being linked to the darker forces of mortality. He was later merged with the war god Era, and together these deities symbolized the inescapable nature of death and violence that touched every part of life in the Mesopotamian worldview. One of the most significant myths involving Nergal is his descent into the underworld to marry Ereshkigal, the goddess of death. The tale begins when Nergal disrespects Ereshkigal's messenger at a divine banquet, leading to his being summoned to the underworld for punishment. However, instead of meeting his demise, Nergal overpowers Ereshkigal, and, at the point of slaying her, she pleads for her life and offers to marry him. This myth serves as an allegory for the balance between life and death, as well as illustrating the volatile nature of Nergal, who moves between the mortal world and the underworld. Interestingly, Nergal's influence wasn't purely destructive. Ancient Mesopotamians would call upon Nergal during exorcisms, seeking his aid to fight off evil spirits. The logic of calling upon this god was that his presence would menace lesser evil spirits into submission. Valkyries, powerful figures from Norse mythology, are best known for their role as the choosers of the slain, serving Odin, the chief of the gods. Valkyries were often envisioned as ethereal shield maidens, clad in armor, with weapons, sometimes on horseback or flying across the battlefield. They're often portrayed as having a divine beauty and purity, which sets them apart from many other entities associated with death, who are often dark or decaying in various ways. Further, they're frequently associated with birds, particularly ravens, which are linked to Odin himself. Their primary task was to select the bravest warriors who fell in battle and escort their souls to Valhalla, where they would prepare to fight in Ragnarok, the apocalyptic battle of the gods. The Valkyries appear frequently in both the Poetic Edda and Prose Edda, key sources of Norse mythology. The Poetic Edda describes Valkyries as fierce shield maidens who ride across the skies, descending onto battlefields to determine which warriors would die and who would live to fight another day. They were not just messengers of death. Their role was crucial to the cosmic order of things, ensuring Odin's hall in Valhalla was filled with the most courageous souls. Valkyries didn't just escort the dead, they also served them once they arrived in Valhalla, often depicted bringing mead to fallen warriors in preparation for the final battle. In this way, their role extended from being mere death messengers to caretakers of the honored dead, maintaining their readiness for the gods' cause. Shinigami, often translated as death gods or death spirits, are relatively recent additions to Japanese folklore, emerging in the Edo period starting in the 17th century. They are often portrayed as spiritual entities that guide souls from the world of the living to the afterlife, though they sometimes are depicted as causing death itself. The idea of Shinigami is a blend of influences from Buddhism and Shinto beliefs. In early Japanese traditions, death-related spirits were feared, often seen as malevolent forces. However, over time, this view softened. Shinigami became more neutral or even benevolent figures, responsible for ensuring the smooth transition of souls rather than spreading terror or destruction. This shift was partly influenced by Buddhism's emphasis on the cycle of death and reincarnation. Descriptions of Shinigami vary wildly, from skeletal figures to more human-like forms dressed in traditional robes. Some stories portray them as invisible entities that only reveal themselves when death is imminent. This versatility in their depiction highlights their fluid role in Japanese folklore. Also, of course, I couldn't complete a section on Shinigami without mentioning why they are so well known outside Japan. 2 words: Death Note. Tartarus occupies a grim and complex role in Greek mythology, existing as both a primordial deity and a fearsome place deep beneath the earth, even further below than Hades. As a concept, Tartarus is much more than just a dark pit. It's a cosmic prison and the ultimate destination for the most malevolent figures in Greek myth. In the earliest cosmologies, Tartarus is depicted as one of the primordial forces of the universe, alongside Chaos and Gaia. Hesiod, one of the earliest sources on Greek mythology, identifies Tartarus as one of the first beings to come into existence in a deep abyss far below the surface of the earth. It was often visualized as a vast, unwelcoming chasm, where even the gods hesitated to tread. This abyss was so deep that, according to Hesiod, it would take an anvil 9 days to fall from the heavens to earth, and then another 9 to reach Tartarus itself. Simply put, if the heavens were as high as one could be, Tartarus was the lowest place one could be. In addition to being a physical location, Tartarus played a role in mythological events, such as the imprisonment of the Titans. After their defeat by Zeus and the Olympians during the Titanomachy, the Titans, including Cronus, were cast into Tartarus. Tartarus thus became the divine prison, where not only these powerful figures, but also other wrongdoers, both divine and mortal, were held. Tartarus also became synonymous with divine punishment. Unlike Hades, which was the resting place of the ordinary dead, Tartarus was reserved for those who had committed heinous crimes, especially offenses against the gods. Some of the most notorious sinners in Greek mythology found their eternal punishment in Tartarus. Sisyphus, for instance, was condemned to push a boulder uphill for eternity, only for it to roll back down every time he neared the summit. Tantalus, another sinner, was eternally tormented with hunger and thirst, standing in a pool of water that would recede every time he bent to drink, and beneath a tree whose fruit eluded his grasp. Notably, virtually any punishment you may associate with Hades is likely more accurately associated with Tartarus. The geography of Tartarus is just as bleak as its purpose. Hesiod describes it as a place beyond the reach of the sun, shrouded in eternal darkness. Its gates were said to be guarded by a hydra, and Virgil added to this image by noting that the entrance was blocked by an enormous gate that no one could escape once inside. Nyx, the goddess of night herself, and one of the most ancient deities, was said to dwell near the edge of Tartarus, and her children, including Hypnos, sleep, and Thanatos, death, resided nearby. The association between Tartarus and punishment isn't just a later philosophical interpretation. Notably, Tartarus being a place of divine imprisonment, where moral justice played a key role, set a foundation for later conceptions of hell in Christian theology. Also, I mentioned Hades a lot throughout this section. I'll be discussing both Hades and his much more popular wife, Persephone, later in the video. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to like and subscribe, and to hit the notification bell, and also share the video with your friends and family. Osiris, one of the most significant deities in ancient Egyptian mythology, holds an intriguing place in this pantheon. Revered as the god of the afterlife, fertility, and resurrection, Osiris's influence is deeply tied to Egyptian concepts of kingship, death, and the natural cycles of life. Osiris was the eldest son of the earth god Geb and the sky goddess Nut, born into a divine family that also included his siblings Isis, Set, and Nephthys. From the outset, Osiris was destined for greatness, marked by his ascension to the throne of Egypt, a position predestined by Ra himself. As king, he ruled with Isis and was celebrated for civilizing the land, introducing agriculture and law. And yes, as you may have noticed, Isis held the dual role of sister and wife, something that pharaohs would adopt during various periods in Egyptian history. Osiris's association with the cultivation of wheat and barley tied him symbolically to the fertility of the Nile, reinforcing his role as a life-giving deity. The central myth of Osiris, though, revolves around his tragic slaying and subsequent resurrection. His jealous brother Set, desiring Osiris's throne, plotted his demise. After being slain and chopped up by Set, Osiris was brought back to life by his wife Isis, who collected his parts and conducted a ritual to give him temporary life. During this period of resurrection, Osiris fathered Horus. While I do have to question the responsibility and ethics of fathering a child with one's sister wife during a period of temporary rebirth, this seemed to work out well for the Egyptian gods. This act symbolizes the cycle of death, with Osiris's death paralleling the Nile's seasonal ebb and flow, where its flooding represented life and growth. Osiris's death was only the beginning of his journey. Osiris did not return to rule the living once more. Instead, he became the ruler of the underworld, overseeing the judgment of the dead. In this role, Osiris judged the souls of the dead in the Hall of Mot, where a person's heart was weighed against the feather of truth. If the heart was lighter, the soul was deemed virtuous and granted entry into the afterlife. If not, it was devoured by the monstrous Ammit. This portrayal of Osiris as a just and merciful judge became one of the most prominent aspects of his character in later Egyptian belief, with him taking this exact role over from Anubis. Unlike other gods of the dead, Osiris is a very positive and hopeful figure who was revered rather than feared. Notably, his connection to the Nile further strengthened his role as a symbol of regeneration. The river's seasonal flooding, which brought fertile silt to the farmlands, was likened to Osiris's own resurrection. In fact, annual festivals celebrated his death and rebirth, with rituals involving the planting of seeds, symbolizing Osiris's return from the dead. The myth of Osiris also played a significant role in shaping Egyptian kingship. Originally, pharaohs were associated with the sun god Ra in the Old Kingdom period. However, as Osiris became increasingly popular, they sought to align themselves with devotion to him. Pharaohs were seen as living embodiments of Horus, the son of Osiris, and upon their death, they would merge into Osiris and become one with him. Over time, Osiris's cult became the most widespread of all Egyptian gods. His primary worship center was in Abydos, where festivals were held in his honor, drawing large crowds who participated in rituals mimicking the myth of his death and resurrection. Pilgrims from all over Egypt would journey to Abydos, hoping to secure a closer association with Osiris in the afterlife, either by having their bodies buried there or by commissioning stelae bearing their names. Some scholars note similarities between Osiris and Jesus, especially regarding themes of death and resurrection. Both figures are believed to have died and returned to offer eternal life. However, most scholars believe these parallels likely reflect shared archetypal themes, innate to humanity rather than a direct influence, though the question remains open. The Grim Reaper is one of the most enduring and recognizable figures associated with death in Western culture. Often depicted as a skeletal figure cloaked in a long black robe, the Reaper carries a scythe to harvest souls at the end of a person's life. This imagery has deep roots, especially in the wake of the Black Death in 14th century Europe, where the figure of death became increasingly prominent in art and folklore. The Reaper's scythe is not just for show, it carries a significant symbolic meaning. In medieval times, the scythe was a tool used for harvesting crops, and when applied to death, it symbolized the reaping of human souls as part of life's natural cycle. The hooded robe, meanwhile, adds an air of mystery and anonymity, implying that death comes for everyone, regardless of status, wealth, or power. Early depictions even included the Reaper on horseback, sometimes carrying a bow, aligning him with older mythologies where death was a bringer of plague or pestilence. Cultural depictions vary as to how involved in death the Grim Reaper actually is. In some depictions, he's depicted as actually finishing off individuals. However, more commonly, he's depicted as a guide to the afterlife despite his horrific appearance. Notably, the Grim Reaper, or a similar personification of death, is included as one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Yama, the Hindu god of death, holds a pivotal role in Hindu cosmology as both the ruler of the dead and the upholder of cosmic justice. His origins trace back to ancient Vedic texts, where he's portrayed as the first mortal to die, thus earning the right to preside over death itself. This initial death established his function as the custodian of the dead, determining the fates of souls after their departure from the physical world. Yama is often depicted with distinct visual symbolism. He typically appears with green skin, wearing blood-red robes and a golden crown, symbolizing his regal status. His grim face, highlighted by coppery eyes, is a reflection of his role as the stern judge of the afterlife. His vahana, or mount, is a black buffalo, and he carries a rope and a mace, representing his ability to seize the souls of the deceased and punish the wicked. This imagery reinforces his association with death, justice, and the inevitability of mortality. Yama's character is multifaceted. While he is feared as the god who oversees death, his role is much more complex. He is known as Dharmaraja, the king of Dharma, or moral order. In this capacity, Yama isn't just a punisher, but also a symbol of cosmic balance. He ensures that individuals are rewarded or punished based on their actions during their lives, embodying the law of karma. Yama keeps meticulous records of every individual's deeds, and it is said that his scribe, Chitragupta, assists him by maintaining these records in a celestial book of destiny. Notably, Yama morphed into a different but related figure of the same name in Buddhist religious traditions. Also stay tuned because I'll be discussing the Buddhist version of King Yama shortly, and for any fans of a certain anime and manga series, you may recognize who he inspired. Santa Muerte, or Our Lady of Holy Death, has emerged as a death goddess strongly associated with Mexico over the last number of decades. Though she is often seen as a saint in Mexican folk Catholicism, Santa Muerte isn't officially recognized by the Catholic Church. Instead, her roots go back to a syncretism of indigenous and European beliefs, reflecting a broader cultural adaptation that has made her an increasingly popular figure worldwide. Santa Muerte's origins can be traced to the pre-Columbian worship of death deities, particularly Mictacatzihuatl, the Aztec goddess of death. Following the Spanish conquest, these indigenous beliefs merged with elements of Catholicism, creating a distinct spiritual figure who represents death not just as an end, but as a universal impartial force. In this way, Santa Muerte serves as a powerful equalizer, comforting to those facing life's most difficult challenges, whether related to death, love, justice, or protection. Her iconography reflects her complex nature. Santa Muerte is most commonly depicted as a skeletal figure dressed in a robe, holding symbols like a scythe and a globe. The scythe represents her ability to cut away obstacles and harvest souls, while the globe shows death's dominion over the world. Additionally, the hourglass symbolizes the fleeting nature of time and life. These representations resonate deeply with her devotees, who see her as a guide through life's hardships. Her followers create personal altars in her honor, offering items like fruits, meat, or coins in exchange for her guidance and protection. Notably, she has been linked to narcos who perform rituals in her honor to seek her protection. Further, in some traditions, she is associated with neo-pagan or magical practices and is called upon for both protection and for dark favors. Notably, despite her role as a folk saint, the Catholic Church has taken a firm stance against Santa Muerte, with Vatican officials denouncing her veneration as blasphemy. Anubis, the ancient Egyptian god of mummification and the afterlife, is perhaps one of the most well-known of all the Egyptian gods. Often depicted as a man with the head of a black jackal, Anubis was initially regarded as the primary deity overseeing the dead. His responsibilities included embalming, protecting tombs, and guiding souls through the afterlife. He was particularly revered during the Old Kingdom, where he was the sole lord of the dead before Osiris rose to prominence. Anubis's black color wasn't just associated with death and decay, but also with fertility and renewal. The black soil from the Nile, essential for agriculture, symbolized life-giving properties. Thus, Anubis's connection with the color black tied him not only to death, but also to regeneration. His role in the mummification process further deepened this association with both death and eternal life, as the preservation of bodies was seen as key to immortality. The mythological background of Anubis is intriguing. Born of an affair between Nephthys and Osiris, he was abandoned by his mother, but later found and adopted by Isis. His early association with Osiris is a major element of his story, and he played a critical role in the embalming of Osiris after his death at the hands of Set. This myth also explains why Anubis became the god of mummification, and why priests performing these rituals often wore jackal masks to invoke his presence. One of Anubis's most important roles was in the weighing of the heart ceremony, a fundamental part of Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife. During this process, Anubis weighed the heart of the deceased against the feather of Mot, the goddess of truth and justice. If the heart was lighter than the feather, the person could enter the field of reeds, a paradise-like afterlife. If heavier, the heart was devoured by Ammit, a fearsome creature, ending the soul's journey. This scene is depicted in many Egyptian tombs, illustrating how crucial Anubis was in the judgment of the dead. Anubis's role as a protector extended beyond death. He was seen as the guardian of tombs, often associated with protecting the dead from grave robbers or malevolent forces. The ancient Egyptians were particularly concerned about tomb desecration, and Anubis was thought to punish those who violated graves. He was also considered a powerful figure in Egyptian magic, often invoked in spells for protection. The priests of Anubis, who conducted embalming and other funerary rites, were highly respected, and Anubis's image often adorned tomb walls, underscoring his protective powers over the dead. Although Osiris eventually became the main god of the underworld, Anubis retained a central role in funerary practices and remained popular throughout Egyptian history. In fact, rather than being overshadowed, Anubis was integrated into Osiris's mythos, often depicted as his loyal assistant, guarding Osiris's body after his resurrection. These later depictions of Anubis during the Middle and New Kingdom era eventually ended up having Anubis depicted as Osiris's son. This integration made Anubis a consistent figure in both public and private worship. In later periods, Anubis was even associated with other deities from outside Egypt. The Greeks, for instance, linked Anubis with Hermes, as both gods guided souls to the afterlife, and unironically called this syncretic god Hermanubis. Yama in Buddhist cosmology is regarded as the Lord of Death. He's responsible for overseeing the hell realms and judging the souls of the deceased based on their karma. Although Yama originated as a deity in Vedic Hinduism, as discussed earlier, his role expanded and transformed significantly within Buddhism, becoming more nuanced across different traditions. In the context of Buddhist beliefs, Yama's primary role is that of a Dharmapala, or protector of the law, or Dharma. He judges the dead and decides their fate, whether they will be reborn in a more favorable condition or sent to suffer in one of the many hell realms, often called Naraka in Buddhist texts. Yama's decisions are based on the karmic actions of individuals during their lifetimes, making him a crucial figure in the broader framework of samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Yama's portrayal as a judge is especially prominent in Tibetan Buddhism. Here, he's often depicted as a fearsome figure, sometimes with a bull's head, symbolizing his dominion over death. He resides in the hell realms, but it's important to note that these realms aren't eternal damnation, as they are in some other religious systems. In Buddhism, hell is just another temporary stage in the cycle of samsara, where souls undergo purification before they are reborn. In Mahayana Buddhism, Yama's role becomes even more intriguing. Despite his fearsome duties, he's not exempt from suffering. Some myths tell of Yama himself enduring the torments of hell, such as drinking molten metal, to purify himself for the grave task of overseeing the punishment of others. This portrayal reflects the Buddhist idea that no being, not even the gods or demigods, is free from the cycles of karma and samsara. In East Asian traditions, Yama's identity continued to evolve further. In China, he's known as Yanluo Wang, a figure that blends Buddhist and Taoist characteristics. Yanluo Wang presides over the courts of Diyu, the Chinese hell, where he judges the souls of the dead with the assistance of his infamous underworld guardians, Oxhead and Horseface. These fearsome beings escort the dead before Yama for judgment. Similarly, in Japan, Yama appears as Enma, the judge of the dead in the underworld. Here, he's often depicted as a strict enforcer of justice, especially harsh on liars and those who dishonor their duties. His role mirrors that of his Chinese counterpart, as he also presides over a court where the dead are judged, determining their fate in the afterlife. And yes, in case you're wondering, for any Dragon Ball fans out there, the Buddhist version of Yama is the basis for King Yema, the judge of souls in the series. To make this connection even more obvious, in the manga his name was actually King Enma. The Keras in Greek mythology are formidable female spirits associated with violent and gruesome death. They're most commonly depicted as human-bird hybrids with black wings. As daughters of Nyx, the primordial goddess of night, and Erebus, the god of darkness, the Keras represent the darker and more violent aspects of mortality. They often hover over battlefields, searching for dying soldiers to claim. Unlike their brother Thanatos, the god of peaceful or natural death, the Keras revel in chaos and bloodshed. Their name, derived from the Greek word ker, meaning doom or fate, perfectly encapsulates their malevolent nature. These spirits aren't just passive observers of death. Their presence marks a violent and agonizing demise. During battles, they descend like vultures, using their talons to tear at the souls of the fallen. Although the Keras don't wield the power of life and death directly, their association with fate is undeniable. The Keras differ significantly from Valkyries of Norse mythology. While both are associated with death on the battlefield, the Valkyries are more benevolent, selecting worthy warriors to enter Valhalla. In contrast, the Keras aren't selective. They represent death at its most brutal, indiscriminately claiming souls without offering any solace or reward in the afterlife. The ancient Greeks didn't view the Keras as merciful beings. Their role was to ensure that violent death maintained its sting without the redemption that other death spirits or deities might offer. Hades in Greek mythology is perhaps one of the most misunderstood gods. He's the ruler of the underworld, a realm that also bears his name, and he governs the dead. Despite his fearsome reputation, Hades isn't inherently malevolent, though like virtually all Greek gods, he behaves in extremely questionable ways. Instead, his role is more about maintaining balance in the natural order of life and death, rather than enacting punishment on souls. Born to the Titans Cronus and Rhea, Hades was swallowed by his father, only to be regurgitated when his brother Zeus led a rebellion against their father. After defeating Cronus in the Titanomachy, the three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, drew lots to divide the world. Zeus took the sky, Poseidon claimed the seas, and Hades was given the underworld, a domain he rarely left. Hades' underworld is a complex realm that encompasses various regions. The most famous are the Elysian Fields, where virtuous souls rest, and Tartarus, where the wicked are punished. Although many myths describe the underworld as a grim place, it wasn't always portrayed as a site of suffering. It was, for most souls, simply a resting place free from the concerns of earthly life. His main responsibility was ensuring that once someone entered his domain, they didn't leave. His three-headed dog, Cerberus, guarded the gates to prevent souls from escaping and returning to the land of the living, rather than to stop the living from entering. Hades' most famous myth is his abduction of Persephone, the daughter of Demeter. But I'll be discussing that story when I discuss Persephone in a moment, because spoiler alert, she eventually becomes the queen of the underworld. Interestingly, Hades wasn't just associated with death, he was also connected to wealth, earning the name Pluton, or the wealth giver, because the riches of the earth, gems, metals, and crops, come from beneath its surface. This eventually led to the figure of Hades being split into two entities, one of which is a more malevolent Hades, known for his abduction of Persephone, and Pluto, known for his hidden underground wealth. Despite being one of the major Olympian gods, Hades was rarely worshipped in ancient Greece. His domain made him an intimidating figure, and few temples were dedicated to him. Most Greeks preferred not to invoke his name, fearing it might draw his attention. Persephone, a central figure in Greek mythology, is both the goddess of spring and the queen of the underworld. Born to Zeus and Demeter, she embodies duality, representing life and death simultaneously. Her story primarily revolves around her abduction by Hades, the god of the underworld, which resulted in her transition from a carefree maiden to a powerful ruler of the dead. Hades fell in love with her and, without her consent, seized her while she was picking flowers, taking her to the underworld to be his queen. Her mother, Demeter, devastated by her daughter's disappearance, abandoned her duties as the goddess of agriculture, causing the earth to become barren and leading to widespread famine. The myth explains the changing seasons through Persephone's cyclical journey between the earth and the underworld. After discovering Persephone's location, Demeter's grief caused her to refuse to restore fertility to the earth. This forced Zeus to intervene, but by then, Persephone had eaten pomegranate seeds in the underworld, which bound her to Hades for part of the year. Ultimately, a compromise was reached. Persephone would spend half the year with her mother, during which time the earth flourished, spring and summer. She would spend the other half with Hades, symbolizing autumn and winter when the earth lay barren. Despite her initial victimhood, Persephone eventually grew into her role as queen of the underworld. She became a figure of authority, ruling alongside Hades. showing a capacity for judgment and mercy, and tempering her husband's harsh and authoritarian nature. Hades and Persephone were significantly boosted in pop culture by the release of the roguelite game Hades in 2018. I suspect their story is now much more widely known than at any time previous in history, even if few people accept their narrative as factual. Chernobog, often translated as the Black God, is a figure from the mythology of the Palabian Slavs. These Slavs were the people who inhabit the area which is now eastern Germany and were gradually Germanized over the course of the late Middle Ages. Notably, given that Chernobog is only known from Christian sources, some scholars have speculated that he is a fictional deity created by Christian missionaries to portray the Palabian Slavs as satanic. Chernobog is depicted as a dark deity associated with misfortune, death, and chaos. His counterpart is Belobog, the white god, who represents light and goodness, though the existence of Belobog is even more uncertain and debated. The earliest known mention of Chernobog comes from the 12th century, in Helmold of Bosau's Chronica Slavorum, where he described the worship of a god of misfortune. However, the historical record is scarce, and most of what we know about Chernobog comes from later interpretations and writings. And it's important to take everything further I say about Chernobog with a grain of salt, because like I said, this god may not have existed at all. Unlike many other gods, Chernobog was not worshipped in the same sense as deities of prosperity or fertility. He was feared and placated, as he was believed to bring about calamities, accidents, and other forms of bad luck. Ancient Palabian Slavs saw misfortune, disease, and natural disasters as divine interventions, and they attributed these events to gods like Chernobog. Chernobog may have also played a role as a winter deity associated with the darkest part of the year, which also may reflect ancient Slavic beliefs about the cyclical nature of time. This concept fits into broader pagan traditions, where seasons and natural cycles were embodied by powerful deities. Hel, in Norse mythology, is the ruler of the underworld, a figure intertwined with both fear and fate. She's the daughter of the trickster god Loki and the giantess Angerboda, making her part of a notorious sibling trio with the wolf Fenrir and the world serpent Jormungandr. Hel herself is often described as having a striking and unnerving appearance, with one half of her body appearing alive and beautiful, while the other half is dead, decayed, or skeletal. This duality reflects her dominion over both life and death, ruling a realm where those who die of illness or old age end up. Her domain, also called Hel or Helheim, lies in the cold and dark regions of Niflheim, far removed from the glorious halls of Valhalla, where warriors who died in battle are taken. Hel's realm is reserved for those who don't die in battle, meaning she presides over the souls of the ordinary dead rather than heroic souls. It's not a place of torture, as later Christian interpretations generally suggested, but it is often depicted as a bleak and desolate underworld. The souls here are not honored like those in Valhalla, but are not actively tormented either. According to the Prose Edda by Snorri Sturluson, Odin, the Allfather, cast Hel into Niflheim when she was still a child, giving her authority and responsibility to care for those sent to her. Talk about throwing her in at the deep end. Pretty questionable parenting, Odin. Hel does not feature prominently in many myths, but she plays a key role in the tragic story of Balder, the beloved god of light. After Loki tricks Balder's blind brother into killing him, Balder's soul is sent to Hel's realm. The gods, devastated by Balder's death, plead with Hel to release him. She agrees, but sets a condition. If every living being weeps for Balder, he will be freed. While nearly everyone did weep, a single giantess, who some believed to be Loki in disguise, refused, ensuring Balder remained in the underworld until Ragnarok. Despite being a figure associated with death and decay, Hel herself is not depicted as evil in the traditional sense. Instead, she is more of a gatekeeper, a sovereign over a necessary part of the Norse cosmology. Her role is much like other death and underworld deities in ancient cultures, such as Hades in Greek mythology, who rule over the dead but are not inherently evil. Interestingly, there are no known cults or rituals directly associated with her, which leaves scholars to debate whether she was venerated as a goddess or simply feared as a personification of death. Supe is a central figure in Incan and Andean mythology, known as the god of death and ruler of the underworld, Ukupacha. His role as both a fearsome and essential deity shows the complex relationship the ancient Andean people had with death and the afterlife. Supe isn't simply a force of evil, but embodies the natural cycle of life and death. While he rules over demons and spirits in the dark realms of the underworld, the Incas didn't necessarily see this as malevolent. Instead, death was considered a necessary part of existence, closely tied to the fertility of the earth. Depictions of Supe vary, often combining elements of the demonic with divine attributes. He was feared and respected, with his image frequently shown as menacing, with features like horns and fangs. However, this doesn't fully capture his essence. The Incas believed that while Supe had control over death, he also oversaw the prosperity of the earth, particularly in relation to mining and agriculture. Miners and farmers, in particular, held rituals and made offerings to Supe, seeking his protection in their work. Miners in particular were known for their devotion to Supe, perhaps due to his connection to the underworld. Tuoni, the god of death in Finnish mythology, reigns over Tuonela, the shadowy underworld where souls of the deceased are sent. Often depicted as an elderly figure with a dark hat and only 3 fingers on each hand, Tuoni exudes a quiet menace, ruling Tuonela alongside his wife, Tuonatar, the queen of the underworld. Tuonela itself isn't a realm of torment like some conceptions of the afterlife, but rather a place of eternal rest. It's a land of stillness and silence, where all souls, regardless of their deeds in life, eventually come to reside. The dead are bound to this somber domain, which is characterized by murky waters and the ever-watchful swan of Tuonela, a mystical bird that glides over the river Tuoni. This swan is said to guard the boundary between life and death. Unlike the more recognizable figures from other mythologies, Tuoni is not a truly malevolent force, but more akin to a force of nature. His presence serves as a reminder of the inevitable cycle of life and death, a force that cannot be negotiated with or avoided. His role is to receive the souls of the dead and ensure they remain in his domain, where they sleep eternally. What's up, everyone? Hope you're enjoying the video. Just a quick reminder to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Also, don't forget to hit that share button and send my video to your friends and family. Era, a deity in Mesopotamian mythology, is most often associated with destruction, war, and pestilence. His story is told in the Epic of Era, a work central to the understanding of how ancient Mesopotamians perceived chaos and the fragility of life. Era's role as a god of pestilence and mayhem is evident in his constant association with chaos. His followers believed that Era was responsible for periods of political upheaval and societal breakdowns, often triggered by war or disease. In the Epic of Era, Era is described as restless and eager to spread chaos. He is awakened by his companions, the Seven, who are personifications of destruction. Together they urge Era to take action, leading to a sequence of devastating events. Era's destructive tendencies are not just random outbursts, but seem to reflect a cosmic balance. His actions in the myth are prompted by a sense of duty to bring chaos as a natural counterbalance to order. For example, the epic details how even the god Marduk, a symbol of Babylon's order and civilization, temporarily relinquishes his throne to Era, allowing him to unleash war and pestilence upon the land. Interestingly, despite Era's significance in mythology, there are few, if any, clear visual representations of him. Unlike gods such as Marduk or Nergal, Era doesn't appear prominently in surviving Mesopotamian art. However, scholars believe that some unidentified images featuring scenes of war, pestilence, and chaos may indirectly represent him. This absence of clear iconography adds a layer of mystery to Era, reinforcing his role as a more abstract force of destruction. Hecate is a mysterious figure in Greek mythology, revered for her connection to the underworld, death, witchcraft, magic, and the supernatural. Although her exact origins are debated, she is often described as the daughter of the titans Perses and Asteria, a lineage that gave her some dominion over the heavens, earth, and sea. Unlike many titans, Hecate retained her powers under the reign of Zeus, signifying her enduring authority across different realms. What sets Hecate apart from other deities is her role at the crossroads, both literally and symbolically. She was frequently depicted as a three-faced goddess, representing her ability to see the past, present, and future, or as a figure standing at the junction of life and death. This triple form, which later associated her with other goddesses like Persephone and Demeter, emphasized her power over transitions and boundaries. Her presence at crossroads made her a protector of travelers, but more ominously, also a guardian of the dead. In fact, ancient Greeks placed statues of Hecate at the entrance of homes and cities to ward off evil spirits. Hecate's connection to the underworld is a core aspect of her identity. One of the most famous myths involving Hecate is her participation in the abduction of Persephone. While other gods watched passively, Hecate helped Demeter search for her daughter. After Persephone's descent into the underworld, Hecate remained her guide and companion, further solidifying her role as an underworld-related deity. One of the more intriguing elements of Hecate's mythos is her association with witchcraft. She was a goddess of spells and all magic, and in particular necromancy. Her symbols reflect this dark mysticism, including the key, representing her control over the boundary between the living and the dead, torches, for lighting the way through the darkness, and serpents. Unlike most of the other gods and goddesses discussed in this video, Hecate continues to be revered in a variety of neo-pagan and modern magic and mystical traditions. Also, I know I'm going to get comments on this from Shakespeare fans, so I'll just address it now. Hecate is the proper Greek pronunciation of the name, not Hecate. Izanami plays a pivotal role in the creation myth of Japan and is a central figure in Shinto cosmology who developed into a death goddess. Her name translates to "she who invites," symbolizing her role in inviting life into existence, alongside her counterpart and husband, Izanagi. Together, they were tasked with creating the Japanese archipelago and populating it with deities. Their story, however, takes a tragic turn, deeply entwining Izanami with both creation and death. The myth begins with Izanami and Izanagi standing on the floating bridge of heaven, churning the primordial sea with a jeweled spear given to them by the older kami, or gods. From the droplets that fell from the spear, the first landmass, Onagoroshima, was formed. The two deities descended to this island and performed a marriage ritual by circling a sacred pillar. However, the first attempt at their union resulted in deformed offspring, as Izanami spoke first during the ceremony, an act that went against the ritual's proper order. When they repeated the ritual with Izanagi speaking first, their marriage was successful, and they went on to create the main islands of Japan, known as the Oyashima, and a multitude of deities. Despite the success of their union, the birth of their final child, Kagutsuchi, the god of fire, marked a dramatic shift in Izanami's fate. Giving birth to this fiery deity fatally burned her, leading to her death. Her grieving husband, Izanagi, enraged by her loss, killed Kagutsuchi in a fit of anger, and from the slain fire god's remains, several more deities were born. Izanami's death marked her transition from a life-giving deity to one associated with death, and her story takes an even darker turn as she descends to Yomi, the land of the dead. Unable to accept her death, Izanagi pursued her into Yomi, hoping to bring her back to the world of the living. Izanami initially agreed to ask permission from the deities of Yomi to return, but warned Izanagi not to look at her during the process. Overcome with impatience, Izanagi broke his promise and lit a torch to see her. To his horror, Izanami's body had decayed, and her appearance was ghastly. Humiliated and furious at his betrayal, Izanami chased him out of the underworld, unleashing the forces of Yomi after him. In his flight, Izanagi managed to block the entrance to Yomi with a large boulder, forever sealing the passage between the worlds of the living and the dead. This event solidified Izanami's role as the ruler of Yomi, where she became the goddess of death, overseeing the spirits of the dead. Her dual nature as both a creator and destroyer reflects the broader themes of life and death in Japanese cosmology, illustrating the cyclical nature of existence. While Izanami's role in the myth begins with the creation of life, her transformation into a goddess of death highlights the inevitable link between birth and mortality. Her myth carries religious significance in Shinto rituals, especially in the practice of purification, which is directly linked to Izanagi's cleansing after his escape from Yomi. The ritual of cleansing before entering a shrine is a symbolic reenactment of his actions, representing the removal of spiritual impurities. Mictlantecuhtli is the queen of Mictlan, the Aztec underworld. She presides over the dead alongside her husband, Mictlantecuhtli. Her primary function is to oversee the bones of the deceased and protect their safe passage through the underworld's 9 levels. In Aztec cosmology, Mictlantecuhtli's role is crucial in maintaining the balance between life and death. The bones she guards have a profound significance. They aren't just remnants of the deceased, but the building blocks of future life. According to Aztec myth, the gods use these bones to create new people, a belief that symbolizes the interconnectedness of life and death, a continual cycle that sustains the cosmos. Her open jaws, a common feature in her artistic depictions, are said to be poised to swallow the stars, a metaphor for the eternal cycle of day and night, life and death. Mictlantecuhtli's influence reaches far beyond her mythological role. Her legacy persists today in the Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead festival, a celebration that has its roots in ancient Aztec traditions honoring the dead. This festival, though syncretized with Catholic elements after the Spanish colonization of Mexico, still maintains many aspects of its pre-Columbian origin. During the festival, families construct altars to welcome the spirits of their ancestors, a practice that echoes the offerings once made to Mictlantecuhtli. While Mictlantecuhtli, her husband, is often depicted with more emphasis in certain myths, Mictlantecuhtli's role is equally essential. Together, they represent the duality of life and death in Aztec thought, governing different aspects of the underworld and guiding souls based on how they died. The Aztecs had a deeply structured view of death, categorizing it into various types: natural death, heroic death, and non-heroic death. Mictlantecuhtli oversaw the destinies of these souls as they entered Mictlan and determined which type of death the individual suffered. Charon, the ferryman of Greek mythology, has long been a central figure in the stories about death and the afterlife. His primary role is to transport souls across the rivers Acheron and Styx, separating the world of the living from the underworld. This task, while simple in its mechanics, carries profound symbolic weight. As a guide for the dead, Charon doesn't judge the souls he ferries, but rather, he facilitates their final journey from life to death. His service comes at a cost. Traditionally, a coin known as an obol was placed in the mouth of the deceased to pay for their passage. This coin served as a toll for Charon's ferrying services, reflecting the Greeks' belief in the importance of honoring the dead with proper funeral rites. The earliest artistic depictions present him as a gruff, old man, usually bearded and wearing ragged clothes, steering his small boat with a long pole. His appearance often mirrors the grim reality of death. He is described as severe, without compassion, and completely indifferent to the souls he ferries across the dark waters. Later Roman interpretations presented him as an even more fearsome figure with fiery eyes and a terrifying demeanor, solidifying his place as an intimidating character in the ancient imagination. Throughout various myths, he encounters several notable Greek heroes. For instance, in the tale of Heracles, Charon is forced to carry the hero across the Styx as part of Heracles' 12 labors. In another story, Orpheus charms him with his music, earning passage to try and retrieve his lost love, Eurydice. These interactions with the living underscore Charon's role as a gatekeeper to the underworld, allowing only those who meet certain conditions to cross while still alive. In Inuit mythology, Sedna is a powerful and complex figure, primarily recognized as the goddess of the sea and ruler of Adlivun, the underworld that lies beneath the ocean. In the most commonly recounted version of her myth, Sedna begins as a mortal woman. Different regions of the Inuit world tell varying versions of her transformation into a goddess. However, all of these stories share a key moment. Sedna's father, either in fear or desperation, throws her overboard from his kayak during a storm. She clings to the side of the boat, but in a brutal act, her father severs her fingers to prevent her from capsizing the vessel. These fingers fall into the sea and transform into sea creatures like seals, walruses, and whales, further cementing Sedna's role as the mother of all marine life. And just as a quick aside, Sedna's dad makes guys like Odin and Zeus look like super dads. After her fall into the ocean, Sedna descends to the bottom of the sea, where she becomes the ruler of Adlivun, the Inuit underworld. Adlivun is a realm where souls must undergo purification before moving on to the land of the ancestors. As the sovereign of this realm, Sedna has control over the spirits of the dead and the creatures of the sea. Her power extends to influencing the availability of marine animals, essential for Inuit survival. When Sedna is angered, often because humans have violated hunting taboos or shown disrespect, she withholds sea animals, leading to famine. Sedna's relationship with humans is a complicated one. She is a deity who must be appeased, particularly by shamans who undertake spiritual journeys to meet her directly. As the ruler of Adlivun, she enforces the natural laws governing life and death. Her influence over the dead is intertwined with her control of the sea, and this dual authority makes her one of the most feared and revered figures in Inuit cosmology. Remember to check out my other videos if you like this one. My content covers topics from unsolved mysteries to true crime, to the occult, to religious beliefs, and more. If you like this video, please do me a huge favor and click like and subscribe, and also click the share button and send it to anyone who you think may enjoy it. Shout out to my patrons Iced Mocha, Kurt the Squirt, Monoxide Wendigo, Jeffer Metcalf, Z-Volts, Courtney Hammett, Out of Gray's Mind, Cap, Dionysus, Silba Rose, Franz Tech, Unknown Delusions, Faye, Jack Russell, Boomslang, Spookiest Becky, Vespertine, Metanova, Will Rowan, Crab Nebula, and Blasphemous.